This is a tidbit of news that I saw recently. I'm sure many of you have seen this also. Maybe you clicked on it, maybe you didn't. Shaken Danish Prime Minister cancels appointments after street attack. And I have noticed a pattern of these attacks on world leaders. And that's what I want to talk about here today. Thank you for tuning in to the Libertarian Front. My name is Joe Palmetto. I hold a bachelor's degree in political science, a minor in Japanese and Asian studies, also a law degree and a practicing lawyer. Also served in the military for 4 years. On this channel, we discuss libertarian politics and also world and global politics because I find all of that to be interesting. If you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. Please, that is a free way to support this show. I'm trying to get to a couple thousand subscribers, so I'd really appreciate it if you can click subscribe, and YouTube will help me out the more likes, subscribes, and shares that I get. So this recently hit Saturday, June 8th, 2024. The article, Shaken Danish Prime Minister Cancels Appointments After Street Attack. Now, this particular attack, I believe, was just an assault. I haven't been able to find the exact details. I haven't dug that deep. I know that she wasn't hurt, and it appeared to be a male individual came up, maybe punched her, tried to tackle her, something along those lines. But in my opinion, this appears to be a bit of a pattern. So, especially in recent years. And I'm 42 years old, so I was a kid in the 80s and a teenager and a kid in the 90s, and I've lived through all the 2000s, obviously. And this wasn't much of a thing in the 80s, in the 90s, or in the early 2000s. Even going into the 2010s, this didn't seem to be much of a thing with world leaders getting assaulted or attacked. It seemed to be very, very rare. However, we'll get to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, the history of assassination. And here's another article. Denmark's Prime Minister Frederiksen assaulted in Copenhagen, man arrested. However, there's been a recent spate of assassinations or assassination attempts, or at least attacks on world leaders. Another example is the assassination of Shinzo Abe in Japan, July 8th, 2022. Wow, I can't believe it's already been 2 years, close to 2 years. And he was not the current prime minister, but he was a long-time prime minister of Japan. One of the longest serving prime ministers of Japan in peaceful history. Remember, Japan is a very peaceful country. It's an island archipelago. So, it doesn't have any physical land borders with any other country or major countries. So it's isolated in a way, but still, assassination of Shinzo Abe. And then fairly recently, also, I'm sure you saw this in the news, the attempted assassination of Robert Fico, who was the prime minister of Slovakia. So that's three, at least in the last 2 years, that's three attacks on prime ministers. So we're talking about the sole leader of an individual country, and there's been other ones too that I haven't caught into this net. And it seems to be an interesting phenomenon that we are seeing that is occurring. And it takes me back to the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, right? Which is the famous assassination. He was the Archduke of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So he was going to be the sole leader of Austria-Hungary, which was a great empire at the time. And he was killed. And he was assassinated in Sarajevo. I guess at the time, location Latin Bridge, Sarajevo, condominium of Bosnia and Herzegovina. I believe it was part of Serbia at the time. So, but what did that assassination do? That assassination, due to alliances within Europe, led to the beginning of World War One. So, Austria had decided that they were going to attack Serbia. Serbia didn't do much in order to sort of ease tensions with Austria after this assassination. And Russia had the back of Serbia. Germany had the back of Austria Hungary. And it set off a chain of events due to these connections and alliances that led to World War One, including the United States, Great Britain, France, and all the major powers and major countries being involved, including the Ottoman Empire. So assassinations are not something to take lightly. Now, the assassinators are. It's interesting in these situations because the assassinators are assassinating or targeting their own leader, right? So this was a little bit different because Archduke Ferdinand was a leader of Austria, and he was killed by, I believe, a Serbian. And however, the Danish prime minister attack, it appears, by all accounts, was attacked by a Danish individual. Shinzo Abe was assassinated by a Japanese man, and Robert Fico in Slovakia, I believe, was attacked by a Slovakian. However, I think we have a lot of reason to worry with this current trend in assassinations. Not only going back to World War One, and when I talk about Japan in particular, if you follow the history of Japan around the turn of the century and the lead up to World War II, from the Japanese perspective, World War II was much longer than the 4 or 5 years that we attribute it here in the United States. Let me grab a sip of coffee. In Japan, they had started their war with China and Korea about 20 to 30 years prior. I believe basically right after World War One, they had, and they may have taken Korea even earlier, but Japan, the Empire of Japan, had conquered Korea and had already invaded China, taken large swaths of China. And inside Japan, what happened was the military started to gain far more influence over the civilian governing structures. And in order for the military to do this, they actually conducted a string and series of high-profile assassinations of political figures in order to strike fear into civilian leaders and also to gain power within the government of Japan itself until in the latter years of World War II, or the Great Pacific War, I believe the Japanese call it the Pacific War. Anyway, in that lead up, the military had gained so much power, and they had gained that power through a method of assassination. That was one of their means of gaining power. And Japan was essentially ruled by the emperor, but really it was a military dictatorship, right? Maybe not dictatorship, more like a military ruled by a council, controlled by the military. That's how Japan ended up in the latter years of World War II. So I think we have to take heed to these strings of assassinations and assassination attempts. They are a sign of the times. And in the lead up to World War I, there was an assassination that sparked the beginning of the war. In the lead up to World War II, there were many assassinations, but particularly in Japan, but other countries as well, where people who defied the forces within a certain country were essentially taken out, so that certain powers, and oftentimes fascist powers, could gain power within the country itself. So these are interesting. Additionally, this is a sign of instability, right? And I believe it's a sign of global instability. And it's fascinating, too, the countries these occur in: Japan, Slovakia, Denmark, fairly, in the case of Japan and Denmark, fairly peaceful, non-political countries. But there's something roiling, I think, within each of these countries. And And on a greater scale, it has to do with global instability. And I think we can go back to 2020, but perhaps prior to 2020, where we start to see a rise of populist governments in Western countries, but in non-Western countries as well. We have the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, 2022, the Russo-Ukrainian war, recently the Gaza war, and a lot of countries are starting to challenge sort of the global hierarchy that was set up post World War One, where the United States and Western nations basically dictated everything to the rest of the world. In some of those countries, obviously Russia, but also China, Iran, the North Korea. They're kind of forming another alliance over here, and the aggressiveness, plus those other factors that I talked about, these wars, the COVID-19 pandemic, the rise of populism, is leading to a high degree of global instability that did not exist, frankly, during much of the Cold War. Because while the Cold War was a dangerous time, the system was bipolar and everybody understood their place, so it was stable. And after the Cold War, there was many stable years. I would say, particularly the 1990s. But I think we're moving into a period of instability. We are in a period of instability right now, which is very dangerous. And these assassinations of high-profile leaders are a symptom of this instability, right? The global instability contributes to these incidents happening. And, with the war in Ukraine raging, the war in Gaza raging, until the world, and it may come soon, it may come later, I don't know. But until the world kind of settles down, I think we're going to continue to see things like this. But there are also, instead of the world settling down, it might become more unstable. And what are some of the things that could create this instability or contribute to it? Well, of course, something like COVID-19, but an economic crisis, a global pandemic of some kind, a natural disaster, or further wars, no matter where they are. The more wars that are going on at any time in the world, the more global instability, because when you have a war, it's going to have rippling effects, especially within the region, but within the entire globe. So keep an eye out for greater global instability. And remember, we live in an interconnected world. And the reason that, to keep an eye on this, and we all know this with the Russo-Ukrainian war, right? But we have alliances that are not too different from the way they existed in World War One, right? With NATO, if one of the NATO countries is attacked by another state actor, it can trigger all the other NATO countries joining in that attack. And if NATO has to get involved as a whole, we're likely looking at a major war, and possibly even something like World War III. Now, I'm not saying that that's inevitable. In fact, I think it's very unlikely. However, I think the odds and the chances are higher than they were in the 90s, or even in the 80s and probably the early 2000s, although a lot of this kind of started with the early 2000s. So just like everybody keep that in mind. I think it's interesting, and I think it's fascinating to watch these assassinations and to read these patterns and see exactly what's going on, right? Attacks on world leaders are brazen and they're bold, especially by their own citizens. I mean, the people who are doing this are risking everything in their lives to take this attack. So what leads people to this sense of hopelessness? Of course, a portion of society, every society is going to have hopeless and depressed or damaged individuals, but not every era in history comes with these sort of attacks. So I think it's something to watch. If these attacks go up, I think that they're a good meter of global instability, and if they go down, we'll see the world becoming more stable. I don't think they're the cause itself, right? But they are a symptom, an indicator. I actually believe, and I'm hopeful, that the world will become more stable in the coming years and decades, But I think right now we have a higher percentage chance of that not exactly being the case, given a lot of the tensions between the United States and Russia, between Israeli countries and the Middle East, between China, its neighbors, and other countries in the world. So keep an eye out. I'm going to continue to cover these issues on my channel. If you like my content, please like, subscribe, comment, and share. Free way to support this channel. And right now, I'm looking for that free support. It goes very, very far. If you enjoy my content and my opinions, I would appreciate your contribution by liking, subscribing, and sharing these videos. All right, everybody, have a great day.